The mountain screamed before the miners did. Aaron Shelby felt it in his boots first, a shudder that traveled up through the rock and into his bones, and then the lantern light guttered sideways as if some great beast had exhaled down the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling. A support beam cracked somewhere close, a sound like a giant's knuckle popping, and then the world above him groaned and began to come apart. Down. Gromma Bonecrusher's voice cut through the falling grit like a blade through cloth, and before Aaron could obey, she had already closed the distance between them. 7 feet of green muscle and fury wrapped in fitted iron-studded leathers, and she threw her body over his as the ceiling gave way behind them. Rock the size of grain sacks slammed into her back. She did not cry out. She simply grunted, low and furious, and hauled him up by the collar of his tunic with one fist, while the other arm swept a fallen timber out of their path like it was kindling. Aaron's boots dragged uselessly against the shifting stone floor. He tried to find his footing and failed, tried to help and only slowed her, and somewhere behind them the tunnel they had been standing in a heartbeat before folded in on itself with a sound like the whole earth swallowing. "Move, human," she snarled, though there was no cruelty in it, only urgency, only a terror she would never have admitted to feeling. She had one hand fisted in the back of his tunic and the other braced against the tunnel wall, half carrying, half dragging him through a corridor that was no longer wide enough for her shoulders, forcing her way through anyway, the rock scraping her arms bloody, her tusks bared in a grimace of effort. Aaron's ribs screamed where her forearm crushed against them, pinning him tight to her side. His shoulder wrenched as she yanked him around a bend too fast for his own legs to manage. He would carry the marks of her grip for a week. He already knew that, deep purple blooms shaped like her fingers. But he did not care, could not care, because ahead of them was a graying square of light where the tunnel mouth still held, and behind them the mountain was still falling. "Almost," she growled, more to herself than to him. Almost the last support beam before the entrance sheared with a crack like thunder. Gromma did not slow. She bent low, wrapped her arm fully around Aaron's waist, and simply ran, carrying him half off his feet through the final stretch of tunnel as the roof came down in a wave of choking dust behind them, so close that grit stung the backs of both their necks. They burst into daylight together, tangled and coughing, and fell into the churned mud of the mine yard as the entrance to the Blackvein mine collapsed with a final, groaning roar and went silent. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Gromma rolled to her knees over him, both hands braced on either side of his head, her chest heaving, dust caked white in the creases of her green skin, blood welling from a long scrape along her forearm. She looked down at him with an expression Aaron had never seen on her before, something raw and unguarded, before she caught herself and the mask of iron control slid back into place. "You are an idiot," she said, hoarse. "You should have run when I told you to run." "I did run," Aaron managed, though it came out as barely more than a wheeze. "You are just faster than me." "I am faster than everyone," she said, and there was the ghost of something almost like humor in it, buried under the fear that still had not left her eyes. That was when the shouting started behind them, and the world that had nearly killed them both turned its attention to something else entirely. None of it would have seemed possible to Aaron 4 months earlier, when he had first walked through the gates of Ashwick Crossing with nothing but a bundle of spare clothes, a battered ledger book, and the calluses of a man who had spent a decade copying scripture and tending beehives behind cloister walls. He had left the Brotherhood of St. Aldrich in the spring, not in disgrace, not in scandal, only in a quiet and terrible restlessness that the abbot had recognized before Aaron had, a young man in his late 20s who had given his life to silence, and found that silence had begun to feel like a slow suffocation rather than peace. He was not made for chanting in a warm chapel while the world went on without him. He wanted his hands to matter to someone. He wanted his days to be counted by something other than bells. So he had gone out into the world with his letters and his sums, which were the only trade he knew, and had found work as a weighmaster in the border market town of Ashwick Crossing, where human coin and orc iron changed hands beneath the shadow of the Greymental Peaks. It was a rough place, half stone and half timber, walled against raids that had not come in a generation but were never quite forgotten, with a market square that filled twice a week with wagons from the lowland farms and packed trains from the orc clanholds beyond the ridge. Aaron's job was simple and unglamorous. He weighed the iron ore and worked ingots the orc traders brought down from their mountain forges, weighed the coin and grain the human merchants offered in exchange, and wrote it all down in a ledger that both sides trusted because he was, by nature and stubborn cloister habit, entirely honest. It was a rarer quality at that scale than it should have been. He first saw Gromma Bonecrusher on a hot, dusty market morning in early summer, and he would remember it for the rest of his life, the way other men remembered battles. She came down the trade road at the head of a small orc caravan, 3 heavy-laden pack mules and 2 younger clansmen trailing behind her, and she rode nothing, because she did not need to. She walked at the front with the long, unhurried stride of someone who had never once in her life doubted that the road would clear for her. She wore fitted travel leathers, dark and supple, laced snug up the sides and reinforced at the shoulders with hammered iron studs that caught the sun. The bodice cut close to a figure that was all hard muscle and undeniable strength. A wide belt cinched at her waist hung with a short forge hammer and a coil of rope, and her black hair was bound back in a thick braid threaded through with small iron rings that clinked faintly as she moved. Her tusks were small and neat, filed smooth at the tips in the manner of a warrior who kept her weapons and her own body equally well maintained, and her eyes, when they found Aaron across the busy square, were a startling amber gold that seemed to measure him and find him wanting in the space of half a breath. She was, without question, the most striking person Aaron had ever seen in his life, and he was entirely unprepared for the way his pulse stumbled at the sight of her. She strode directly to his weighing table, ignoring the human clerk at the next stall who called out a friendlier price, and dropped a sack of raw ore onto the scale with a thud that made the whole table shudder. "Weigh it true, cloister boy," she said, in a voice like gravel poured over warm stone. "I have heard your kind likes to thumb the scale against my kind." Aaron looked up at her and found that his voice, when it came, was steadier than he expected. "I have never thumbed a scale in my life," he said. "It would be a sin against arithmetic if nothing else." Something flickered behind her amber eyes, surprise maybe, or the first thin thread of interest. "Arithmetic has sins now." "Only when men lie with numbers," Aaron said, already sorting the weights, already feeling the strange, unfamiliar thrill of her attention on him like sun on his skin after a long winter. "I gave that up when I left the cloister. Turns out I was better at counting than praying." "A monk who counts iron," she said, and there was something almost like amusement curling at the corner of her mouth, quickly smoothed away. "Ashwick Crossing grows stranger every season." He weighed her ore with careful, exact attention, called the number aloud so both of them could hear it, and paid her in full honest coin without shaving a single copper mark from what her clan was owed. When she took the coin from his hand, her fingers, twice the size of his own, brushed his palm, and Aaron felt that small contact all the way up his arm like a spark jumping a gap. "Gromma Bonecrusher," she said, as if daring him to flinch from the name, from her, from any of it. "Aaron Shelby," he answered, and did not flinch at all. She looked at him a moment longer than the transaction required, gaze traveling over his plain brown tunic, his ink-stained fingers, the quiet steadiness of a man who did not posture or perform, and then she turned and walked back to her mules without another word, though Aaron noticed, or thought he noticed, that she glanced back once before she reached the edge of the square. He thought about that glance for 3 days. She came back the following week, and the week after that, and it became, without either of them naming it as such, a kind of ritual. She would bring her clans or to his table specifically, waving off the other weighmasters with a look that could curdle milk, and they would talk while he worked, sharp little exchanges that always seemed to carry more heat than the words alone accounted for. It was on her fourth visit that Usgur Grimtusk first inserted himself into what had, until then, belonged only to the two of them. Usgur was a broad, scarred orc warrior of Gromma's own clan, a champion of some renown among the Bonecrusher holdings, with tusks left long and unfiled in the old fighting style and a reputation, Aaron would later learn, for having asked for Gromma's hand at 3 separate clan gatherings and been refused each time. He came striding into the market square that day with 2 of his own men, saw Gromma leaning easily against Aaron's table in quiet conversation, and something in his face went thunderous. "Bonecrusher," Usgur said, planting himself between her and the table with the deliberate insolence of a man staking territory. "Your clan chief asks why you linger at a human stall instead of finishing the trade and returning to the camp." "My clan chief asks nothing of the sort," Gromma said, not moving from where she stood. "You ask it, Usgur, because you cannot stand to see me speak to anyone who is not you." A ripple of interest went through the nearby stalls. Aaron kept his eyes on his ledger and his hands steady on his weights, though every part of him was listening. "You waste your time on a soft little cloister rat," Usgur said, loud enough for the whole square to hear, and he reached out and shoved Aaron's weighing table hard enough that the iron weights scattered across the packed dirt. "He could not lift your hammer, Bonecrusher, let alone stand at your shield arm in a real fight." Aaron felt his face go hot, more from the insult to his honesty as a weighmaster than the insult to his manhood, and he knelt without a word to begin gathering the scattered weights, because that, at least, was something he could do. What happened next he would remember for the rest of his life, as one of the moments the whole shape of things changed. Gromma moved between Usgur and the table in a single fluid step, close enough that her chest nearly brushed his, and though he had a full head of height and breadth on her, he took an involuntary step back from whatever he saw in her face. "You will not touch his table again," she said, low and terrible. "You will not touch him. If you have quarrel with me, Usgur Grimtusk, you bring it to me with steel in the training yard like a warrior, and not by knocking over a good man's honest work like a jealous child." "He is human," Usgur spat as though that settled everything. "And you are a fool," Gromma said, "which is a far worse thing to be." She bent then, in front of the whole watching square, in front of humans and orcs both, and picked up the scattered iron weights herself, one by one, and set them back on Aaron's table with a care that seemed almost tender coming from hands that could have crushed his skull without effort. She did not look at Usgur again. She looked at Aaron, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with iron or coin at all. "Thank you," Aaron said quietly, once Usgur had stalked off with his men trailing behind him, humiliated and furious. "Do not thank me," Gromma said, though her voice had gone gentler than he had yet heard it. "I did not do it for you. I did it because I do not like bullies, and I do not like being told who I may speak to." She paused, and something almost uncertain crossed her face, an expression so unlike her that Aaron found himself holding his breath. "Though I suppose I do not entirely dislike speaking to you, cloister boy." "I have a name," Aaron said, smiling despite himself. "I know your name," Gromma said, and there it was again, that ghost of a smile. "I simply prefer the other one. It suits you less than you think." That was the day Aaron understood, with the calm certainty of a man reading a familiar page of scripture, that he was in a great deal of trouble, and that he did not want, even slightly, to be rescued from it. The weeks that followed were not without their friction, because Ashwick Crossing was a border town built on generations of hard history, and not everyone in it was pleased to see the market's weighmaster spending so much time in close conversation with an orc warrior twice his strength. The town's mine foreman, a barrel-chested, red-faced man named Garrick who oversaw the Blackvein mine in the hills above the crossing, and who had never in his life met a scale he did not want to cheat, took a particular dislike to Aaron once word got around that the young weighmaster had begun correcting Garrick's own crooked accounting of the ore his crews sold to the orc smiths. You'll ruin this town's profits, Garrick had snapped at him one evening, cornering him near the granary with two of his overseers flanking him for effect. Giving those green devils full weight when I've been shaving a tenth off the top for years. That tenth pays wages, boy. That tenth keeps this town fed. That tenth was never yours to take, Aaron had said, quiet but unmoving, because a decade of cloistered discipline had taught him how to hold his ground without raising his voice. I will not falsify a ledger, Garrick. Not for you, not for anyone. Garrick had called him a fool and a traitor to his own kind and a dozen other things besides, and had stormed off promising it was not the end of the matter. And Aaron had gone home that night with his hands shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the strange, unfamiliar exhilaration of having stood his ground for something he believed in and not folded. He had not told Gromma about the confrontation. She found out anyway because Ashwick Crossing kept few secrets, and when she next came to his table she set her jaw in a way that made the iron rings in her braid tremble. Garrick threatens you, she said. It was not a question. He blusters, Aaron said. I am not afraid of him. You should tell me if he touches you, Gromma said, and there was something fierce and possessive in the way she said it that made Aaron's chest ache with a warmth he had no name for yet. I would break both his arms and consider it a mercy. That would not help my case for honest accounting, Aaron said, though he was smiling. It would help mine, Gromma said. I do not like men who threaten what is mine to protect. She had not meant it, he was fairly sure, the way it sounded, the possessive weight of that final word, but neither of them corrected it, and the silence that followed was charged with something neither of them was yet brave enough to name. It was near the end of that summer, on a night when the market square had emptied, and the stars had come out hard and bright over the Graymental peaks, that Gromma finally closed the distance between them entirely. She had lingered after the other traders left, ostensibly to help him carry his weights and ledgers back to the storeroom he rented near the granary, though both of them understood by then that it was an excuse. They walked together through the quiet streets, her long stride shortened to match his, and when they reached the low stone wall behind the granary where the town's lanterns did not quite reach, she stopped, and so did he, and the air between them went taut as a drawn bowstring. Aaron Shelby, she said, testing his full name in her mouth like she was weighing it the way he weighed her oar. I have known warriors. I have known chiefs and champions and men who thought themselves great. I have never known a man who stood his ground against Garrick with nothing but his own stubborn honesty to protect him, and did not once think to boast of it to me afterward. There was nothing to boast of, Aaron said. I only told the truth. That is precisely why it matters, Gromma said, and she reached up, slow enough that he could have stepped back if he wanted to, and touched the line of his jaw with one huge, careful hand, her thumb tracing the small scar above his lip that he had gotten falling from a cloister roof at 19. You are not what I expected when I first thought of humans. You are not soft. You are simply gentle, which is a very different thing and far rarer. Gromma, Aaron said, and her name in his mouth came out rough with everything he had been holding back for weeks. If you do not wish this, she said low, tell me now and I will never speak of it again. I wish it, Aaron said, more than I have wished for anything in my life. And then she kissed him, or he kissed her. Neither of them was ever entirely sure afterward which of them moved first, only that it was fierce and hungry and far gentler than her strength should have allowed, her hand cradling the back of his head as though he were something precious rather than something breakable. And Aaron kissed her back with all the pent-up longing of a man who had spent a decade behind cloister walls learning to want nothing, only to discover, in the space of one summer, that he wanted everything, as long as it came wrapped in green skin and amber eyes and a voice like gravel over warm stone. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Gromma rested her forehead against his, an oddly tender gesture from someone built like a siege engine. This will not be simple, she said. My clan will not easily accept it. Your town will like it less. Usger will make it his life's purpose to see it fail. I did not choose you because it would be simple, Aaron said. I chose you because I have never in my life felt as alive as I do when you are near me. Something in Gromma's face cracked open then, some final wall coming down, and she pulled him against her chest and simply held him for a long moment beneath the stars, her chin resting on top of his head. And Aaron thought, with the clarity of a man finally arriving somewhere he had been traveling toward his whole life without knowing it, that he had never once in the cloister felt God as close as he felt her heartbeat against his ear in that moment. They did not hide what had grown between them exactly, but they did not announce it either, moving through the following weeks with the careful discretion of two people who understood that Ashwick Crossing's peace was old and thin and easily torn. Gromma still came to his table on market days. Aaron still walked her back toward the trade road when the light grew long. But now there were stolen moments behind the granary. Now there were nights when she lingered until the lanterns burned low. Now there was a warmth between them that grew bolder and less careful with every passing week, until neither of them could quite remember pretending otherwise. Usger noticed, of course. Usger noticed everything that touched Gromma, the way a starving man notices bread through a baker's window. He confronted Aaron alone one evening in early autumn, catching him on the trade road as he walked home from the market, and this time there was no crowd to witness it, only the two of them and the long shadows of the Greymental foothills. "You think you have won something," Usger said, blocking the road with his broad body. "A little human trinket that a warrior lady picked up out of boredom. She will tire of you, Shelby. She was born to stand beside a champion, not a scribe." "Then that will be her choice to make," Aaron said, refusing to be baited though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Not yours, not mine either if it comes to that." "You do not understand our ways," Usger said, and for a moment something almost like genuine frustration showed through his contempt. "A bonecrusher does not simply choose a mate as she pleases. There are duties. There are clan bonds. You will destroy her standing among her own people, and you are too small and too foolish to even see it happening." It was the first time Aaron had felt real fear at the thought of what he and Gromma had built, not fear of Usger's fists, but fear that the man might be right, that his love for her might cost her something he could never repay. He did not tell Gromma about that particular fear. He carried it instead, quietly, the way he had once carried scripture, turning it over in his mind on long nights until it wore smooth with handling and he could set it down again, at least for a while. Autumn deepened, and with it came the trouble at the mine. Garrick, still furious over the honest ledgers Aaron kept insisting upon, had begun cutting corners elsewhere to recoup what he saw as lost profit, most dangerously in the shoring timbers that held up the deeper shafts of the Blackvein mine. Orc miners working alongside Garrick's human crews, part of an uneasy but functioning arrangement under the border treaty, had complained more than once that certain tunnels groaned and shifted in ways they did not like. Garrick had ignored every warning, calling the orc miners cowardly and the human ones lazy, and had pushed the digging deeper into a new iron vein that promised a fortune if it did not first kill everyone working it. Gromma had been assigned by her clan to oversee the orc crews at the mine that season, a position of some trust and responsibility, and it was in that capacity, on a cold gray morning in late autumn, that she found herself standing at the mine entrance arguing with Garrick about the state of the number 3 shaft while Aaron, sent by the town reeve to record the week's ore output for the trade ledgers, stood nearby with his ledger book open and his stomach already tight with unease. "Those beams should have been replaced a month ago," Gromma said, arms crossed, her voice hard enough to carry across the yard. "My people will not go down that shaft again until it is shored properly." "Your people will go down that shaft or your people can go home," Garrick snapped. "I've a quota to fill and a treaty that says orc labor is bought and paid for same as anyone's." "Then I will go down myself and see the damage with my own eyes," Gromma said, "and you will listen when I tell you it is unsafe." "Fine," Garrick said, sneering. "And take your little scribe friend with you, since he's so fond of accurate numbers." Let him see the vein for himself, and write down exactly how much iron he's costing this town by coddling you." It was petty and spiteful, an obvious attempt to humiliate them both, and Aaron saw the flash of fury cross Gromma's face at the implied insult, but she only nodded once tightly and told Aaron to follow her down. They should never have gone. Aaron knew that later, turned it over endlessly in the weeks that followed, the way he turned over every hard thing until it wore smooth. But at the time it had seemed a small errand, a quick descent to check a vein and record a number, nothing more. They were perhaps 60 feet down the number 3 shaft, lantern light flickering off walls veined with dull iron ore, when the mountain began to scream. It was the same collapse the story had already shown, the same desperate flight through failing tunnels, the same terrible strength with which Gromma had thrown herself over him and dragged him bodily through collapsing stone toward the gray square of daylight, the same bruises blooming purple and black across his ribs and arms where her grip had saved his life at the cost of his comfort. But now, arriving at it again with the fullness of everything that had come before, Aaron understood what it had cost her, understood the particular terror in her eyes when she had knelt over him in the mud outside the ruined mine entrance, understood that she had not simply saved a convenient friend. She had saved the man she loved, and had been for one endless stretch of collapsing stone entirely uncertain that she would manage it. They emerged into the mine yard together, coughing, filthy, alive, and it took only moments for the yard to fill with shouting overseers and running miners and the first terrible cries of "Garrick, where's Garrick?" Because the foreman had been standing near the number 3 shaft entrance giving orders when the collapse began, and when the dust settled and the frantic digging uncovered him at last, he was already dead, crushed beneath the very beam he had refused to replace. Grief moved through the mine yard fast, and grief, Aaron would learn, curdles quickly into blame when there is a foreign face nearby to blame it on. "She was down there," one of the human overseers said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, pointing a shaking finger at Gromma where she knelt in the mud, still trying to catch her breath, blood drying on her scraped forearms. "She was arguing with Garrick not an hour before. She went down that shaft with him standing right there at the mouth of it." "The shaft collapsed on its own rotten timbers," Gromma said, rising slowly to her full height, and something in the shift of the crowd's mood made Aaron's stomach drop even before the next voice rose. "Look at the human," someone else called out, and Aaron realized with sick clarity that they meant him, that they were staring at the dark bruises already spreading beneath his torn sleeve, the unmistakable shape of a huge hand's grip stamped into his flesh. "Look what she did to him. Orc temper, that's what that is. She probably went into a rage when Garrick wouldn't back down, killed him, and near killed the scribe boy trying to hide it." "That is not what happened," Aaron said, stepping forward despite the pain in his ribs, his voice cracking with the effort of being heard over the growing murmur. "She saved my life. Those bruises are from her pulling me out of a collapsing tunnel, nothing else. Garrick died because he refused to shore up rotten timbers, not because of anything Gromma did." "Then why won't she say so herself?" Reeve Halden, the town's magistrate, said, arriving at last through the crowd with 2 guards at his back, his face grim. "Bonecrusher, explain the bruises on this man's body, or explain what happened to Garrick. One or the other, and quickly, before I have to assume the worst of both." Every eye in the yard turned to Gromma. Aaron watched her jaw tighten, watched the old iron pride settle over her features like a visor coming down, and he understood with a sinking heart exactly what she was about to do and exactly why. "I owe none of you an explanation," Gromma said, flat and hard. "Garrick died because he was a fool who valued coin over the lives of the men and women who worked beneath him, human and orc alike. That is the truth. I will not dignify the rest of your accusations by discussing them." "Gromma," Aaron said quietly, tell them what happened in the tunnel." "I owe them nothing," she said again, refusing even to look at him now, and Aaron realized with a jolt of understanding that her silence was not guilt. It was pride, wounded and furious pride, the same iron will that had once picked up his scattered weights in front of a jeering crowd rather than let anyone see her flinch. She would not explain herself to people who had already decided she was a monster. She would rather let them believe the worst than beg for their good opinion. It was, Aaron thought with a rush of frustrated love, the single most Gromma thing she could possibly have done, and it was going to get her killed if he did not find a way to stop it. The days that followed were the hardest of Aaron's life since leaving the cloister. Reeve Halden, under pressure from Garrick's grieving family, and a town suddenly remembering every old prejudice it had never quite let go of, declared that the matter would be settled according to the old border treaty's provisions for serious disputes between human and orc parties, a custom neither side had invoked in years, but which both sides still, technically, honored. Trial by ordeal, to be held at the town forge, where the accused would face challenge under the eyes of both peoples, and where, if a champion stepped forward to contest the accusation on her behalf, the matter could be settled instead through combat, blood answering blood, steel answering steel. Usger Grimtusk stepped forward within the hour, and Aaron's blood ran cold when he understood why. "I do not step forward to save her from the human's judgment," Usger announced to the gathered crowd, standing tall and broad in the forge yard where the challenge would be held 3 days hence. "I step forward because Gromma Bonecrusher has shamed her clan by binding herself to this human weakling, and if she is proven blameless in Garrick's death, I will still claim the right to challenge her honor before our own people, and prove to every clan who hears of it that she belongs beside a warrior, not a scribe." "You would use my grief and my danger to force a claim on me," Gromma spat at him, fury blazing in her amber eyes. "You are lower than I thought possible, Usger, and I thought I already knew the floor of your character." "I am giving you a chance to be saved twice over," Usger said. "Once from the human's noose, once from your own foolish heart." It was that night, with the trial only 3 days away and the whole town simmering with suspicion, that the second great blow fell, the one that would nearly undo everything Aaron and Gromma had built together. Mother Elspeth, the town healer, had insisted on examining Aaron's injuries properly, worried that the bruising along his ribs might mask a deeper hurt, a cracked bone or worse. Aaron, exhausted and aching and still reeling from the accusations swirling around Gromma, had allowed it without much thought, sitting on the edge of a cot in the healer's cramped stone house while she peeled back his torn tunic to check the damage. It was Usger, arriving uninvited and unannounced to needle Aaron one final time before the trial, who threw open the door at exactly the wrong moment, and it was Usger's eyes, along with Mother Elspeth's and, worst of all, Reeve Halden's, who had come to ask the healer's opinion on Aaron's fitness to testify, that fell upon the mark high on Aaron's shoulder just as the tunic slipped free. It was unmistakable to anyone who knew orc custom, a claiming bite, the old deep mark an orc woman gave a mate she intended to bind herself to for life, healed now but still visible, the clear shape of Gromma's teeth pressed into the muscle above his collarbone from the night weeks before when their love had finally found its fullest, most private expression beneath the stars behind the granary, a moment meant only for the two of them. Never meant for the eyes of a magistrate and a jealous rival and a healer who gasped and stepped back as though she had seen a wound rather than a promise. "She has claimed him," Usger said, his voice gone strange and tight. "She has marked a human as her mate. Before all the gods of stone, she has bound herself to him already and said nothing to her own clan." The room went very still. "That is not evidence of anything but my own private life," Aaron said, pulling his tunic back up with hands that shook, more from anger than fear now. "It has nothing to do with Garrick's death. It has everything to do with the character of the woman on trial," Reeve Halden said grimly. "A woman who marks a man as her own in secret, who hides such a bond from her own kin, is a woman comfortable with deception, wouldn't you say? It does not help her case, Master Shelby. I am sorry, but it does not." Word of the discovery spread through both the human town and the orc encampment beyond the ridge before the sun had fully set, and by the time Aaron found Gromma that night, standing alone at the edge of the trade road staring out at the dark shape of the Greymental peaks, she already knew. "You should not have let them see," she said, before he had even reached her back still turned to him, her shoulders rigid. "I did not let them do anything," Aaron said. Usgur barged in. "There was nothing I could have done to stop it." "They will use it against me now," Gromma said, and for the first time since he had known her, her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough that he heard the fear beneath the iron. "My own clan elders will ask why I bonded myself to a human in secret instead of bringing you before them properly. The humans will say it proves I am dangerous, that I claim what is not mine to claim. Usgur will use it to say I have already disgraced myself, that I am no longer fit to be challenged with honor, only put down like a beast that has bitten its handler." "Then we tell them the truth," Aaron said, coming to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "That I gave myself to you as freely as you claimed me, that it was never a secret born of shame, only a secret born of wanting one thing in this world that belonged only to us before the whole town got its hands on it." Gromma turned to look at him then, and in the fading light her amber eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, though she would never have admitted to such a thing. "I am not ashamed of the mark," she said quietly. "I have never been ashamed of you, Aaron Shelby. I am only afraid, for the first time in more years than I can count, and I do not know what to do with the feeling." "Then let me stand beside you," Aaron said. "Not to fight for you, I know you do not need that, and I know you would not want it even if I could, but to stand beside you when they look at us both and try to decide what we are. Let them see we are not ashamed." She reached out and took his hand then, right there on the open trade road where anyone might see, her huge fingers wrapping gently around his, and for a long moment neither of them said anything else at all. The morning of the trial dawned cold and clear, the whole of Ashwick Crossing turning out to fill the market square around the town forge, human townsfolk on one side, orc clanfolk who had come down from the ridge on the other. An uneasy, watchful crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder in the autumn chill. Reeve Halden stood before the forge itself, where the smith had built the coals up high and hot through the night, the heat of it shimmering the air even from 20 paces away, and beside him stood Mother Elspeth with Aaron's account written out in careful, formal script, and a grim-faced orc elder named Thok, who had traveled down from the clanhold to oversee the honor of his people in the proceedings. Gromma stood at the center of the square, in her fitted travel leathers, chin high, refusing to show even a flicker of the fear Aaron knew still lived somewhere behind her steady amber eyes. Usgur stood across from her, arms crossed, a long dueling blade already strapped at his hip in anticipation of the challenge he intended to press regardless of how the ordeal resolved. "Before the matter of challenge is addressed," Reeve Halden announced to the gathered crowd, "the accusation regarding Foreman Garrick's death must first be settled. Gromma Bonecrusher stands accused of causing his death through violence and of assaulting Aaron Shelby in the same incident. She has refused to speak in her own defense. Does anyone present have evidence to offer before the ordeal is called?" It was the moment Aaron had been waiting 3 sleepless nights for, and he stepped forward before his own courage could fail him, his ledger book clutched in both hands. "I have evidence," he said, and his voice, though it shook slightly at first, grew steadier with every word. "I kept the ore inventories for the Blackvein mine for the past 4 months. I have here Garrick's own purchase orders for shoring timbers, dated and signed in his hand, showing that he ordered replacement beams for the number 3 shaft nearly 6 weeks ago. He held the ledger high enough for the crowd to see the entries. I also have here his instructions to his overseer, given only 3 days before the collapse, canceling that order and diverting the coin instead toward his own private accounts, because, in his own written words, the shaft will hold through the season and the orcs complain of nothing that costs me sleep." A murmur ran through the crowd, human and orc alike. "Gromma warned him," Aaron continued, in front of witnesses the very morning of the collapse, that the number 3 shaft was unsafe. Garrick sent us both down it anyway, out of spite, to prove a point. The mountain did not fall because of any orc temper. It fell because one greedy man valued his coin purse over the lives of the people who worked for him, orc and human both, and he paid for that choice with his own life. Gromma Bonecrusher did not kill him. She very nearly died trying to save us both, and she saved me at the cost of her own blood and skin. And these, he pulled his sleeve back, showing the fading but still visible bruises along his forearm without a trace of shame now. These are not wounds she gave me in cruelty. They are the marks of a woman who would not let go of me even as the mountain came down around us both. The square had gone very quiet. Aaron turned slowly to look at Gromma, and found her watching him with an expression of such naked, astonished love that it nearly stole the rest of his courage. "As for the mark upon my shoulder," Aaron said, turning back to the crowd, "I will not apologize for it, and I will not let anyone here treat it as evidence of shame. Gromma Bonecrusher claimed me because I asked to be claimed. I love her. I have loved her since the first week I met her, when she picked scattered weights up off the ground in front of a jeering crowd, because she would not let a bully humiliate an honest man. If that love and the mark that comes with it is a crime in this square, then I ask that you charge me alongside her, because I will not stand here and let her carry the weight of it alone." For a long moment, nobody spoke at all. It was Thok, the orc elder, who broke the silence, stepping forward with the slow gravity of a man who had seen many seasons and did not waste words lightly. "I have heard the human's evidence," he said, "and I have seen the mark upon his shoulder with my own eyes, and I say to you all, orc and human alike, that there is no shame in what has passed between them. Bonecrusher gave her mark freely, and he wears it freely, and any among us who calls that dishonor has forgotten what our own ancestors' bonds were built upon before we let bitterness with the lowlanders poison our memory of it." He turned to Reeve Halden. "The matter of Garrick's death is settled by the human's own written evidence. There is no ordeal needed. Your foreman killed himself with his own greed, and any among your people who still wish to blame my kinswoman for it are simply looking for someone to hate because grief demands a target and truth is inconvenient." Reeve Halden, to his credit, did not argue. He examined the ledger himself, called 2 more witnesses from among the mine's overseers who confirmed, reluctantly, that Garrick had indeed cancelled the shoring order, and within the hour announced before the whole square that Gromma Bonecrusher stood cleared of any wrongdoing in Garrick's death, that the matter was closed, and that the town owed her and Aaron both an apology it was too proud and too shaken to fully voice, but which showed plainly enough in the shamed faces of those who had shouted loudest for her blood 3 days before. But Usgar Grimtusk had not come to the forge yard for justice. He had come for a claim, and cleared of one accusation or not, he was not yet finished. "The matter of Garrick is settled," he said, stepping into the center of the square before the crowd could disperse, his voice carrying easily over the murmur. "But the matter of honor is not. Gromma Bonecrusher, I challenge you before your clan and before these humans both. You have bound yourself to a man who cannot lift a warrior's hammer, who has never stood in a shield wall, who will grow old and die while you remain in your prime. I say you have shamed the Bonecrusher name, and I claim the right to prove, blade to blade, that you belong instead beside a warrior who can match you in strength as well as spirit." The forge coals glowed hot and orange behind him, throwing long shadows across the packed dirt of the square, and Aaron felt his heart lurch with a fear entirely different from anything the trial had raised in him. Because this was not a matter of evidence and ledgers, this was a matter of blades, and he had no way to protect the woman he loved from a fight she might actually have to bleed for. Gromma did not hesitate. "I accept," she said, already reaching for the forge hammer at her belt, "and I will enjoy teaching you once and for all that strength is not measured only in the size of one's fists, Usgar, but in the size of one's heart, and yours has always been smaller than you like to admit." Gromma, Aaron started, stepping toward her, but she caught his hand for one brief, fierce moment, her amber eyes locking on his. "I do not need you to fight this for me," she said, low enough that only he could hear it. "I have never needed anyone to fight for me. But I want you to watch, Aaron Shelby, because I am about to make certain that no one in this square, human or orc, ever again questions whether I chose you out of weakness." The crowd cleared a wide circle around the forge as the two combatants faced each other, Usgur with his long dueling blade drawn and gleaming, Gromma with only her forge hammer and the iron-studded leather of her own two forearms, close enough to the roaring coals that sparks drifted between them on the cold autumn air like falling stars. It was, Aaron would think later, one of the most terrifying and most magnificent things he had ever witnessed. The two of them circling each other in the firelight, testing, feinting, the ring of steel against hammerhead sending sparks scattering into the dusk each time their weapons met. Usgur was strong and fast and furious, driven by years of wounded pride, but Gromma fought with something he did not have, a cold, clear purpose that burned brighter than his anger, and Aaron understood, watching her move, that she was not fighting for status or clan standing at all. She was fighting for the right to choose her own life, and there was nothing in Usgur's arsenal that could match the strength of that. The end came fast, when Usgur overextended on a heavy downward strike meant to end the fight in one blow, and Gromma sidestepped with a speed that seemed impossible for someone her size, caught his blade arm with her free hand, and drove the flat of her hammer into his chest hard enough to send him sprawling into the dirt at the very edge of the forge's heat, his sword skittering away across the packed earth. She stood over him, breathing hard, hammer raised, and the whole square held its breath. Then she lowered the hammer and stepped back. "I will not kill you, Usgur," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not because you do not deserve it, but because I do not need your death to prove what is already true. I have already chosen. I chose the day I picked his scattered weights up off the ground and found I could not stop thinking of him after. I will not unmake that choice for your pride or my clan's comfort or anyone else's approval. He is mine and I am his, and that is the whole of the matter." Usgur lay in the dirt for a long moment, chest heaving, and when he finally spoke, some of the old fire had gone out of his voice, replaced by something closer to grudging respect. "Then I withdraw my challenge," he said. "You have proven your strength twice over today, Bonecrusher. I will not shame myself further by pretending otherwise." He rose, gathered his fallen blade, and walked away through the parting crowd without another word, and though Aaron did not think the two of them would ever be friends, he understood that whatever poison had driven Usgur's jealousy had finally, at long last, burned itself out in the light of that forge fire. The crowd began to disperse slowly around them, human and orc alike drifting back toward their homes and camps in the gathering dusk, the tension of the last 3 days finally bleeding out of the square like heat from cooling iron. Some of the townsfolk who had shouted loudest for Gromma's blood came forward, awkward and shamefaced, to offer quiet apologies that she accepted with more grace than Aaron thought he could have managed in her place. Thok the Elder clasped Aaron's shoulder before he departed, a strange gesture of respect from an orc so old and so set in the ways of his people, and told him that he would carry word back to the clan hold that the human Waymaster had proven himself worth more than his size suggested, which Aaron understood from the old orc's grave expression to be very high praise indeed. But it was Gromma, standing alone with him at last in the empty square as the forge coals burned low and the first stars began to prick through the darkening sky, who mattered more to him than any of it. She turned to him, and for the first time since the mine had nearly killed them both, some of the iron finally went out of her shoulders, and she simply looked tired and relieved and achingly beautiful in the dying firelight. "You stood before the whole town," she said, "and told them you loved me and let them see my mark on your skin and did not once flinch." "I have spent most of my life flinching from things," Aaron said. "Hiding behind cloister walls, keeping my head down, never asking for anything the world might refuse me. I am done with that. I am not going to hide the truth of what you are to me, Gromma, not from a magistrate, not from Usgur, not from anyone. She crossed the space between them and pulled him against her, careful of his healing ribs even now, and pressed her forehead to his the way she had that first night behind the granary. I never discussed the bruises, she murmured, because I could not bear the thought of explaining to strangers what it cost me to save you, when the truth of it belonged only to us. But I will tell you now, since you are the only one who has ever truly deserved to hear it. I have never been more afraid in my life than I was in that tunnel, Aaron Shelby, not of the mountain falling, but of the thought that I might not get you out in time. I would have torn that whole mine apart with my bare hands before I let it take you from me. I know, Aaron said, his throat tight. I felt it. Every bruise you left on me in that tunnel, I would carry 100 more of them gladly, if it meant I got to keep waking up beside you. She kissed him then, slow and unhurried, with none of the desperate urgency of their first kiss behind the granary, and all the deep, settled certainty of two people who had already weathered the worst the world could throw at them and found each other still standing on the other side. In the days that followed, the last of the trouble in Ashwick Crossing quietly settled itself. A new foreman was appointed at the Blackvein mine, an honest man this time, chosen jointly by the town reeve and the Orc clan elders in recognition of how badly Garrick's greed had nearly cost everyone, and the shoring timbers in every shaft were replaced before a single ounce more ore was pulled from the mountain. The market square returned to its familiar rhythm of trade and haggling, though now, when Gromma Bonecrusher walked to Aaron Shelby's weighing table twice a week with her clan's ore slung over her shoulder. No one in the crowd so much as blinked at the easy way she leaned into his side while he worked, or the way he reached up without thinking to brush his thumb along the healing scrape on her forearm, or the way her hand found the small of his back whenever Usgur passed within a stone's throw. An old habit of possessiveness that had softened now into something more like comfortable devotion than jealous warning. Gromma's clan, once they had heard the full account of the trial from Thok's own mouth, proved more forgiving than either of them had dared hope. There was no grand ceremony, no sweeping clan blessing given with pomp and feasting, only a quiet visit from her clan chief to the crossing one gray autumn afternoon, a sharp-eyed old orc woman who studied Aaron for a long, silent minute before pronouncing, with the flat finality of someone who had judged livestock and warriors alike her whole life, that he would do, that Gromma had chosen worse men to fight and far worse men to love, and that the clan would recognize the bond already sealed between them rather than waste further breath arguing against what the mountain itself had already tested and found true. It was enough. It was, Aaron thought, more than enough. He gave up his rented storeroom near the granary before the first snows came, and Gromma, for her part, spent less and less time at the clan encampment beyond the ridge, until it became simply understood, without either of them making some grand declaration of it, that they would build their life together in the small stone cottage at the edge of Ashwick Crossing that Aaron had slowly been fixing up through the autumn evenings, patching the roof and mending the door and clearing the overgrown garden plot out back. Work that Gromma joined without being asked, hauling stone and timber with an ease that made the whole task go 3 times as fast as it would have alone, laughing at his careful, methodical cloister habits even as she matched her own considerable strength to whatever task he set his mind to. There was a night, not long before the first true snow of the season, when they sat together on the low stone step outside that cottage, a blanket thrown over both their shoulders against the cold, a single lantern burning between them, and Gromma reached over and traced the fading mark on his shoulder where his collar had slipped loose, the same mark that had once nearly cost them both everything, now simply a quiet, private thing that belonged to no one but the two of them. "Do you regret it?" she asked, quiet in a way she rarely allowed herself to be, any of it, the bruises, the trial, everything this has cost you choosing me. Aaron turned to look at her, at the firelight caught in her amber eyes, at the strength in her shoulders that had once carried him bodily out of a collapsing mountain and would, he did not doubt, carry him through whatever else the world still had waiting for them. "I left the cloister because I wanted my life to matter to someone," he said, "because I could not bear the thought of dying having never been truly known by another soul. I have been known by you since the very first week we met, Gromma Bonecrusher, seen more clearly than I have ever been seen in my life, and chosen, again and again, by a woman who could have had anyone in either of our worlds and decided, for reasons I still do not entirely understand, that she wanted me instead. I would walk into 100 collapsing mines if it meant I got to keep being chosen by you." "You are a very strange man, Aaron Shelby," Gromma said, but her voice had gone thick, and she pulled him close against her side beneath the blanket, resting her cheek against the top of his head the way she had that very first night behind the granary. "A very strange, very stubborn, very brave man. I do not think I will ever stop being glad the mountain did not take you from me." "It could not have," Aaron said. "You would not have let it." "No," Gromma agreed, and there was fierce, unshakable certainty in the single word, the same certainty that had dragged him through falling stone and defended him before a hostile crowd and stood unbroken through a trial that had tried to take everything from her. "I would not have let it. I never will." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall soft and quiet over the sleeping town, dusting the market square and the mountain road and the dark shape of the graymental peaks beyond. And when dawn came gray and clean the next morning, it found the two of them still there on the step together, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the light climb slow and golden over the ridge. The storm of the past season finally, fully past, and nothing left standing between them and the rest of their lives but each other.